Friends, greetings to everyone. Here's another market review. Today, we'll discuss what's happening in the market. Are there any anomalies we need in order to make long or short trades? Before we begin, let me remind you that we're on the Platform Pro trading service. This is a service we've developed for analyzing limit orders as well as margin orders. So the first thing to start with is, of course, Bitcoin. Take note that the previous buyer zone was at the 61,000 level. And by the way, if anyone thinks that your metric is showing a knife situation, you're mistaken because you don't know when that knife will end. But with the help of metrics, we can understand whether it was a real knife or a fake one. You know, the kind that after a short sideways movement will continue to drop. It's precisely the limit metrics that answer this question, whether it's time to buy or not. They answer the most important question, when? And as I already mentioned, the previous buyer's zone was at 61,300. What's happening now? Prices haven't reached those levels yet, so we're not moving into the buyer's zone for now. We still have a difference of at least 66 million between the diffs before reaching balance. I'm not even talking about the crossover between diff and ask. So the next entry point for a long position will be a solid spot to enter a longer term long, like for 5 or 6% on Bitcoin. That's assuming we get a new buyer zone that forms higher than the low of the previous buyer zone. So at the moment, I don't see any entry points for a long position. But if the new buyer zone forms lower than the previous low, then it'll just be a small bounce you can take advantage of to grab one, maybe 1, maybe and a half, 2% at most. So we're only taking short bounces. But if the buyer zone is higher than the previous one, then we can expect a more significant move. Why am I not looking at altcoins? Because the current market phase just isn't favorable for trading altcoins, so there's really no point in paying attention to any individual altcoin right now. Now let's look at the short preset and see from the short side if we have any short anomalies. We recently talked about opening shorts in these areas, after which we saw a drop. Yeah, and here, let me reload this chart again so that all the presets are open. I'll remove these hence as well. So we had a previous seller zone here, after which we saw the expected drop. Then we entered the buyer zone at this point. I closed my short here, after which there was another bounce. The market went through the seller zone again. At that moment, I was streaming and recommended opening at least one short position out of 2 orders. There was also a question in the comments about whether to close the short at all, or to hold it, or to take profits on such moves. Guys, we're trading intraday, so take profits at 1.5 to 2% is the maximum. That's the maximum because we're trading intraday. I'm not talking about any medium-term scenarios right now. That's not the focus of this review. Right now, I don't see any entry points for shorts because there's no new crossover. In other words, the market is in ballast. The scenario is the same as yesterday. Nothing is happening. We do have some volatility, but it's insignificant. Yesterday, at the time of the review, when I did it, the prices were at 11 o'clock, and now it's also 11 o'clock. The prices were here, and now the prices are in the same place as yesterday. Well, we saw some movement, 1.5% on Bitcoin, but we came back to the same levels. That's not an anomaly, it's just intraday volatility. And there's no point in trying to trade in these kinds of situations. I'll repeat myself, we're not looking at altcoins because the current market phase doesn't favor them. I'll let you know when it's time for altcoins. For that, I'll turn on the funding indicator. Funding shows us the sentiment on the futures market, and alt season starts at the moment. Let me open up some altcoin, for example, Doge. I think everyone knows it, the little dog in the hat. So when does alt season start? It's when we see a sudden surge in the number of long positions across all Binance futures pairs. Like in this case, it was 64% of all futures pairs. And this is the time, to trade altcoins, because here we can see some good moves. Here, the funding rate suddenly spiked, and Doge took off too. Here, the funding rate shot up again, and both Bitcoin and Doge went up. So these are the ranges for trading altcoins. Well, it was a pretty normal situation in 2024, just for the record. So a year and a half ago, that was when you could actually make money on altcoins relatively safely. But now, you should only trade altcoins if you're shorting them. When we see shorting anomalies, it's better to open a short on altcoins instead of Bitcoin, or vice versa. Well, basically, we only consider longs on Bitcoin, but for shorts, instead of Bitcoin, we can look at altcoins too. Next, what else should we pay attention to? Well, since we started talking about funding, let's take a look at funding and see what's happening right now. And let's also use an example of some altcoin, just so it's clear. Alright, since we started with Doge, let's stick with Doge. When our funding group crosses above the negative group, those are the moments when we forget about longs, just like it happened here, because the price might go up a bit more in the short term, but after that, it will definitely be brought back down below the entry point of the long traders across the whole market, because funding, our analyst, shows all Binance futures pairs as a percentage, indicating which groups are entering, and the prices always come back and liquidate those longs. So basically, there's a constant hunt for longs. Here again, the funding group crossed above the negative group and the prices dropped. Here, the situation was the same. The funding group crossed above the negative and the prices dropped. A similar situation happened here as well. There was a lot of back and forth, but from here there was also some kind of correction right away. Yeah, but that's not exactly what we're interested in, but later on there was actually a pretty decent move. Right now, the funding is balanced, meaning 14% of all Binance trading pairs are shorting with such amounts that the prices are lower than spot. Only 5% are in long positions. Well, that's normal. That's the standard. There are no deviations here, so the funding doesn't suggest opening either shorts or longs. Next, about margin loans. By the way, speaking of margin loans, there's an interesting situation here. I think it makes sense for us to switch specifically to Bitcoin because that's the main coin we're looking at in this review. In the past 24 hours, margin traders have paid back $109 million, meaning they've returned it to the exchange. And since people borrow USD from the exchange to buy coins in margin trading, it's likely that this payback is happening at a loss because prices are starting to drop. But actually, what's much more interesting for us is when this metric doesn't go down, but instead rises and reaches $250 million. And that's a great spot to open a short position. Because when margin traders borrow $250 million in a single day, that's when the hunt for them begins. That's how the algorithm is set up. When $109 million is returned, well, is there anything positive about that? Well, there's something, but it's not a point to enter a long position. This just tells us that margin traders are afraid of this correction and are gradually giving back the coins they accumulated earlier. If we look at it cumulatively, in general, the amount of borrowing is only increasing. So if we look not just at a single day, but over the whole period, the amount of borrowing is only going up. Here, traders were opening margin longs, but now they've decided to gradually give them back. Everything is very sluggish, guys. The market is really sluggish. I don't see any entry points. Altcoins, I'm telling you, I'm not even looking at them, and I don't recommend you do either, at least for intraday trading. About the long-short account ratio. Let's take a look at what's happening across all margin pairs available on Binance. Again, there's some negativity here. Right now, the long-short account ratio across all coins is the same as it was last time before the dump. In other words, in this range, the long-short account ratio is the same as it is now, but prices are much lower than before. That's also negative. If we look at the coin, meaning the long-short account ratio on Bitcoin, we'll see that Bitcoin is heavily longed. In other words, right now there are 18 times more longs than shorts. That's also negative. The last time we saw a situation like this, even though prices were much lower than before, much lower, the last time these kinds of numbers appeared was right before the dump, and it was just insane. Back then, the whole market was longed on margin. There were 90 times more longs, 90 times more accounts were in longs, and after that they all got wiped out. Now, once again, the ratio of long to short accounts is growing, even though prices are at rock bottom, and it's likely that those distant margin traders will also get wiped out. What conclusions can we draw? What conclusions can we make? Let's also take a look at the delta. Basically, let's not rush. I'll turn on total and probably select depths of 3 and 8%, 3, 5, and 8%. I don't need all the depths. Let's invert the scale for convenience. And what can we see here? Well, there's a certain level from which the algorithms start pushing the prices up. When we go below, let's say, the marked boundary, yes, you can start looking for longs, and from these levels, we see growth in the future. And at the same time, it's interesting when the lines are in the correct order. So right now, we have the order of the lines as 3, 8, 5, but it should be 3, 5, 8. So these are also some anomalies. There are actually some separate observations for this metric. I'll record a separate video for the Academy, like on my Telegram channel. But the point is that with Delta, you can look at both inversions and overlaps. Right now, there's an inversion, 385, but the order should be 358. Alright, let's not focus on that right now. But what's the idea? It's that we have an upper boundary, a lower boundary, and right now we're in the middle of this channel. What does that mean? It means we're close to balance. So no matter how much we want it, at the moment, I don't see any trading opportunity. Let's look at the ratio on Bitcoin with a depth of 3 and 30%. And to make it easier to see, I'll mark these depths in black, like this, and in red. So where do we consider longs? Well, we consider longs when the 3 crosses the 30. So for example, here was a situation where the 3 crossed the 30, meaning the ratio on Bitcoin for limit orders at a 3% depth was, let's say, more pronounced than at a 30% depth. There was also a situation like this in this sideways range. Well, it's the same thing here. So these are all places where you can take intraday trades. Here's another situation. And since these are intraday trades, they imply short take profits, at most 1.5, maybe 2%. That's the maximum for Bitcoin. For intraday trades, that's normal. Well, right now, I don't see any entry points. No matter what anyone says, there just aren't any entry points right now. So let's sum things up. Overall, the market is in balance. Given the ratio of long to short accounts and margin trading that we're seeing, I still expect a decline in the near future, and right now there are no entry points for either long or short positions. That's why I'm taking the position of an observer at the moment, and will wait for the next trade opportunity. That's what I'm thinking. So I think it's better not to enter the market in either direction right now. We need to wait until some kind of anomaly appears, and then, based on those events and the emergence of anomalies, make trading decisions in the moment. If you're interested in what I'm talking about, subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can make money here. Write in the comments which topics you'd like me to cover in the next review. And check out my Telegram. There you can connect to Trading Platform Pro and learn more about its features. That's all for me. Thanks everyone. Goodbye.